Welcome back to another episode of The Casuals. I'm Jin.
And I'm Saki.
Today we're going to introduce a new segment called A Meal for Two. And what a meal for two is we talk about our experiences with food in various different establishments. And how that will work is we will talk about their location, price, time, flavor, and quality. Then we will give the establishment an overall rating based off a 5-star rating. And so today's establishment we will talk about today is a place called Crispy House. And it's quite an odd experience of how we even discovered it in the first place because we did not discover it together. You discovered it first, Saki. So would you like to tell how you went on to discover that place?
Yeah, so um I randomly discovered it by through a friend. He mentioned because he's Filipino, Crispy House is a Filipino establishment, and he mentioned that there was a good place nearby, and he said it was a little difficult to find. And I was like, "Oh, okay." So he showed me where it was, and yeah, it's this little hole in the wall restaurant, and there was no sign. So yeah, it was a little difficult to find unless you knew, unless you're like a regular there, then you would know where to find it. It's just kind of hidden. That's how I discovered that place.
And so you had mentioned Crispy House in passing whenever we got together during our random hangouts and we would kind of talk about food. Um, you would kind of go, well, what do you want? And I was like, well, I'm feeling Asian food. And you're like, well, what about crispy? So I'm like, what's that? And you're like, oh, it's just this Filipino place, that sells pretty good Filipino food. I was like, oh, that's cool. But during the time you mentioned it, we actually never went. Funny enough. And so one day I decided to try and find it myself. And when I tried looking it up on the Google Maps, that place did not show up properly, as you mentioned before. So I ended up having to like ask you. I was like, how did I find this place? And you're like, oh yeah, just put in this address instead. And so I put it in the address, and I actually discovered, yeah, they have no sign, which surprised me. I was like, how in the world does this establishment get even customers in the first place? Well, I discovered pretty quickly because I went there during, I believe, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There were a ton of people showing up. There were backlogged with orders constantly, and so as you can expect, it being a very specific cuisine and a hole in the wall. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of Filipino people showing up at that place ordering Filipino food because it's that damn good. And so that's how I ended up discovering the place. And so eventually, we both went together at some point, and I forgot what you ordered. I believe you ordered some kind of pork dish. Do you remember what you ordered during that time?
Yeah, the dish is called sisig. It's basically a deep fried pork belly that's like stir fried with like a lot of lime juice, onions, peppers, and stuff, just like that with rice.
And so, what I ordered during the time we went together, and what I practically ordered the first time too, because I loved it so much, was their fried rice. And they have three types of fried rice: beef, pork, and chicken. Like most other places that would typically serve fried rice would usually have those three meat options. To me, they don't really make a difference, but some other people will. So that time I ordered pork, and we ordered to go, which kind of does make a difference. I feel like obviously during the time we went, the pandemic was still causing restaurants to not have dine-in, so we ended up having to do takeout anyways. And so now this is what we're going to talk about the location, price, time, flavor, and quality. So, location wise, I would say it's kind of a difficult place to find unless you're in the know because it does not show up properly on Google House when you look up Crispy House.
Yeah, I don't think it's even on Google Maps. Unless someone tells you about it, you won't know where it is.
And it's kind of weird that that happened in the first place, but unless you know someone, it's gonna be hard to find unless you do some fancy, work, I guess. And for price, I would say the last time we had gone, the price was pretty fair for what it's worth. What about you?
I generally think the pricing is good as hopefully it doesn't, increase, but you never know what is going to happen. But otherwise, pricing to me, I'd say very fair.
Yes. And what about flavor? For me, based on the dishes I've had, I feel like the flavors were extremely good. That is, worthy enough the hassle to try and find the place the first time, especially their fried rice. And I'll talk about their fried rice a little bit more specific later on because it's a little bit of a unique thing in my opinion. What about the seasick that you had?
Oh, sisig flavoring, I think is. I've had a couple different places as well to compare it, but I think their flavoring for me is the best. I like their how they make it better than other places that I've had.
I've had their seasick before too, and interesting enough, for me it was a little bit too sour, but I can see why people would really enjoy that seasick. Not to the fault of the establishment themselves, it's just my preference. I don't like too much sour things, but for those who really like sour, like that to cut that greasiness, I think the seasick is super great from Crispy House. And then going into that, we'll talk about the quality. I feel like the quality of food is exactly what you would expect from a kind of like a local, you know, well, well visited place. It's very good quality for just it being a local place, not a franchise whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree. Their quality is very good. It's just tiny little mom and pop shop, hole in the wall. And to me, I think those places have better quality than the big franchises.
Most definitely, especially when they rely heavily so much on like the regulars. They have to keep the quality up, or else the regulars are not going to come back. It's that kind of saying where like if you're, especially when you're, um, you know, Korean, let's just say, you don't want to go out and eat Korean food all the time when you eat Korean food at home. So that place has to be worth something for you to eat Korean food anyways at a place, instead of having it at home. So I feel like the
Mhm.
quality there is it's good because well, one, we've experienced it, but two, it's telling that Filipino food or Filipino people, not food, sorry, go there all the time to eat Filipino food. So yeah. And so with that, we'll go into our 5-star rating, our personal 5-star rating off of 5 stars. What would you give the establishment of Crispy House out of a 5-star rating?
Personally, I would probably give it a 4. The only thing that for me, just personal preference is it does take a while if you order certain things. Like it could be like a half-hour wait for you to pick up your food, which is, not great, but or sometimes even longer or shorter. Just depends really on how busy they are, so you gotta hit it at a sweet spot.
And for my rating out of 5 star, it is also 4. And I did forget to talk about the time on this, which is very important for a lot of restaurant deals. Um, when ordering from a restaurant, it does take time for them to give you the order. I did forget about this. I'm sorry. But funny enough, you and I actually had very different, polarizing experiences with the time for them to get out our order. Um, Apparently, one time when you ordered food, it took them around, what, 40 minutes, I think,
Around
for some
40,
reason.
45 minutes, just because sisig, the pork is deep fried, so it does take time to deep fry the pork and then stir fry it with all the aromatics and stuff. So that is the reason why it does take longer than a normal stir fry.
And my fried rice, funny enough, came in at around 10 to 20 minutes max, depending on what time of day. So they do get busy. So if you go at a very busy time, dependent on your order, as Saki said, it will take a while. And so that may be an actual deal breaker for a lot of people. So yeah, that's that's Crispy House as an establishment. And so today's episode is all about food. And it's not just about places that we've been to that we want to talk about. We also want to talk about more, I guess, trendy foods out there. but unfortunately, both Saki and I are not keen on trendy foods. But we do know some trendy foods that do exist, and I believe you do have a very specific, more trendy food that has been more upcoming these days, and that is mochi donuts. And I believe you do have a lot to talk about. Would you like to share?
Yeah, so mochi donuts. Those have been becoming more popular over the years. A little bit pre-COVID is when I heard about them. And there's just, I don't know, there's a huge following behind these mochi donuts. One establishment specifically, it's named Mochi Nut, and they sell more than just the donuts. But for the sake of this episode, we're just gonna focus solely on the donuts. So these donuts, the reason why they're called mochi donuts is there's a specific type of flour in there that makes it a little chewier than a normal donut, like an American donut. And in Japanese, it's called mochi, and it's like sticky, chewy rice. So it's like a rice flour in there. And honestly, it doesn't make it that much chewier like you would expect. So with that being said, Mochi Nut, there's a bunch of different locations, and there's a couple different things about these donuts that I just don't particularly understand why they do it. So first one is you can't just buy a singular donut. Most donut places you go, you buy a single donut for yourself and you're good to go. These places only sell it by a half dozen or a dozen, which is a 6 or a 12 pack. And the price is a little bit much. I think just because they're like the new hip popular thing is why they're a little more expensive, but for 6-piece pack donuts is $16.50 when you can go to a normal regular American donut shop and get one for about 80 cents to a dollar. So that makes these donuts over 250 each just for a single donut. And then on top of that, of course, they're little different flavors, not like your regular chocolate bar or your maple bar. They do have unique flavors. I do like that about it. But the rotation of their flavors changes daily. So let's say you wanted, since we're talking about Filipino food earlier, ube. You want an ube donut. You can go there and get an ube donut. Oh, let's say you want another one the next day. Sorry, the daily rotation changed. It's not there right now, and you don't know when it's gonna come back unless you go every day, or it says on their Instagram page that they post their donut flavors daily. So it's kind of like you can't get the same thing every day if you wanted to. So with that being said, I think mochi donuts, I don't understand the hype about them. I would rather go to a regular donut shop and just get one for so much cheaper. Especially because honestly, I could just get one and not half a dozen for myself.
That also,
Anyways,
there's a ton of local donut shops that sell for also equally reasonable quality and price all over the place. There's tons of local donut shops out there. You don't need to only go to Krispy Kremes, which is a different topic that we'll have to talk about. And what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say if you had any thoughts about these mochi donuts.
So my experience with mochi donuts is almost slim to none from what I remember, but I do remember someone else having mochi donuts, and someone had the mochi donut in front of me, and he just kind of went, "Well, this is not what I expected." I'm like, "What do you mean by that?" And he's like, "Well, I expected it to be mochi-like because it's in the name, but it's just basically a regular donut in that sense." And so, um, I never really went out to buy mochi donuts just based on what he said. If I'm gonna buy a donut, I'm just gonna buy a regular donut. If mochi donuts are not gonna be that much different, and why would I pay something that costs maybe twice or three times more than a regular donut per donut, that is? So I never went out of my way to buy a mochi donut. So I don't think they're worth. Maybe they're worth trying once, and that's about it. But as as a regular purchase, no, I don't think that would be worth.
Yeah, and if
And
you do purchase these donuts, sorry to interrupt you, but if you do purchase these donuts, please go with a group because again, you can only order a 6 or a 12 pack. And the 12 pack I forgot to mention earlier, but the 12 pack is $30, which is an outrageous amount for donuts, personally.
yeah, and so speaking of donuts, there's another form of donuts that's also been kind of getting popular lately. They're considered more of an artisan or that like the how do you say that word again? Artisanal, like the artist,
Artisanal?
artisanal.
Hmm.
Man, we suck at words, but you get what I mean. It's more of a kind of like a fancy donut, and that would be cake donuts. And cake donuts, for what it's worth, is actually very delicious in my opinion. Dependent on if you can make them at home or if you get them at a establishment, then your opinions would vary. I feel like so. My experience with cake donuts is one time my sister brought donuts out of nowhere, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And she said, "Oh, it's cake donuts." And I tried it, and they were very delicious. Um, the time when she brought them, this was probably a very old set, an old set that they probably never sell anymore. Um, the flavors were the following: rose plus strawberries on a donut, Earl Grey citrus, Anzuki matcha, coffee and chocolate, strawberry pistachio shortcake, blueberry lemon, peanut butter and chocolate chip. They were all delicious to each in their own. And I was like, oh, how do you order this one? My sister said that you had to order it from Instagram. I'm not gonna mention their name just because they're not a franchise or a chain, so I don't want to out them out in that way. But the only way to get them is you have to order in through Instagram. They're like kind of like a local bakery type thing, and you can only order it in dozens or half a dozen. And here's the catch: I looked at their prices currently. You thought the mochi donuts were outrageous in their price for $16 for about half a dozen. You said.
Yeah, 16.50 for half a dozen, which is
Get
six
this:
pieces.
their current cake donuts cost $35 for half a dozen, $70 for a dozen. And when I mention these cake donuts, they're not big. They're smaller than the size of your hand, I feel like. Paying $70 for 12 donuts is to me it's pretty outrageous despite them being all handmade. They do mention that they don't make them in large batches or whatever. They're always handmade, which I understand that would bring up the price of it, but if I'm an average person, which I am in terms of income and to spend or disposable income rather, I am not gonna spend $70 on 12 donuts when I could use that $70 to buy 7 days worth of fried rice that will last me well over 2 weeks. Because let's say for example back to Crispy House, the amount of fried rice that I got for the price was $10 for 3 servings of fried rice. That's a lot. I'm spending about $3 per serving in just for fried rice. Now, take 7 fried rice. That's 21 days worth of fried rice. 3 weeks rather. So, in my opinion, if you have the money to spend, maybe it's worth spending $35 for half a dozen at this particular place. I do not know if other establishments have very different prices, but after learning about the prices of these cake donuts, I was just like, no. I'm sorry. They were delicious, but I don't think they're worth the pain of spending that much money when I could spend it on something else. So yeah, that was cake donuts. I don't know if you have any thoughts about cake donuts.
Honestly, I don't have really any thoughts about it because I don't think I've ever really had one, but I have had, more pricey donuts, like the specialty kinds that are, a couple bucks a piece. But I've never particularly had a cake donut from what you're talking about.
I see. Well, that concludes our, popular, trendy food, upcoming popular foods talk. And I would love to get into another segment called the Food Adventures, where we've had all sorts of food adventures, and it's not just limited to talking about like our thoughts about a certain restaurant or thing. It's basically some wacky stuff that we've been through going to food establishments, but unfortunately the time has been going on for a little bit too long for this episode, so we're gonna have to end it here. And so, would you like to do our ending today, Saki?
Sure, I can do that. So, thank you for listening to this episode. I'm Saki.
And I'm Jin.
This has been The Casuals, and we will see you all next week.
Bye bye.